Good morning. So we're here to talk about grief and loss, which is really exciting. I do think it's exciting, right? Because whenever we can understand our children better, or the children with whom we interact, it's exciting, right? To understand them more fully, to connect with what's going on in their hearts and their minds. These are really good things. How many of you were here last night? About half of you. Wonderful. Just a little bit about myself. For those of you who weren't here, I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. It's about 33 degrees there right now. So my husband said, you could stay. Just stay another day because you might come back to some snow, a little dusting. I grew up in Michigan, so Indiana snow is nothing like Michigan snow, but it is colder than here nonetheless. And I've done a lot of work within the adoption community. Most recently, I worked at an adoption placing agency for about 6 or 7 years. That was kind of my last stint in social work. And since resigning from the agency a few years ago, and during that time, I started educating current adoptive parents, other professionals, foster parents, prospective adoptive parents, educators, church leaders on the complexities of adoption. There seem to be a lot of people to help you in the beginning, right? You go through your social worker, your agency, you have classes that you need to go to. But we know the impacts for our children and for our families continue long after the paperwork is complete, long after getting off an airplane or leaving a courtroom, right? As our kids continue to age, develop, understand, wrestle with the truths of their reality, right? And so really, I started dedicating my time more to families who are further down the road and who still need the ongoing encouragement, education, empowerment, like Jody said, sometimes some challenges, right? To be challenged and to be willing to understand various perspectives as it relates to caring for kids. I'm also an adoptive mother of 2 kids, 10 and 12, and I'm an adopted person as well. I was born in Korea, adopted when I was about a year of age, and have lived a lot of these complexities of adoption, and have had to examine my own reality as it relates to adoption, as it relates to relationships, and how adoption impacts at various times and in various ways my life even today and even moving forward. We are going to do a couple of things today. We're going to take a good look at loss and grief. And then talk about how we can walk our kids through this, how we can receive, how we can be with children as they experience these losses and as they manifest it through grief in various ways. So first we're going to talk about the fundamentals of loss and grief as it relates to adoption. You should all have a handout. It's stapled a couple pages. Grab a pen. We know, first of all, that loss precedes adoption, right? In a perfect world, there would be no adoption. None of us would have to be here, right? In a perfect world, families would not fall apart. Kids would be able to stay with their parents. Dads and moms would be able to parent their children. Without loss, there would be no adoption, and adoption is, in fact, a result of great tragedy. Tragedy in one's family, perhaps one's community, culture at large. Loss, then, is at the hub of the wheel. That's from an article written really in the early 80s, which was far ahead of its time in some ways, that talks about some of the core truths in adoption as it relates to loss and to grief. We cannot forget about the beginnings that our children with whom we interact, the beginnings of their lives, the experiences they've had that have resulted in their being in our care, in our home. We know that these losses affect kids at various times, and that grief is the natural response to loss, right? All of us in this room have experienced losses. Grief is natural. It's a good thing, right? Do we want kids who just think, oh, one mom couldn't take care of me, so the next mom came along, no problem? Is that a healthy way for us to view families? Oh, if this mom, if she dies or if something happens to her, no problem, I'll get another one. Right? When we look at it that way, that makes no sense. We want, in my mind, our kids to be able to look at their lives and to see all of what it is, right? The gains, the good, but also the hard. To have a healthy, realistic approach. So we need to get comfortable with these losses and with the grief. We know that typically and historically, the losses inherent in adoption have been ignored or dismissed. Why do you think that might be? What are your ideas? Easier to look at the positive, easier not to talk about it. Man, that's uncomfortable. Who really wants to have like a grief party in which you talk about all the sad things, right? Why else? Adoption is supposed to be a clean slate. That happened when that baby was 2 days old. That happened when that child was 2 years old, and look at how much better he has it now. We've given permanence. Why else? Insecurity. Tell me about that, if you don't mind. Sure, adoptive parents still feeling a little insecure, perhaps, in their own roles as foster parents, as adoptive parents, right? Not quite sure what footing they have, not quite sure about these biological parents of whose children they love so dearly, but what about talking about the biological parents, talking about them, the loss, the hard? Why else? So I would say that most of the people who write about adoption, right, are often coming from the lens of being an adoptive parent. Adoptive parents, myself included, sometimes we just see the good, the happy. We've gained, in fact. Perhaps we've always wanted to be parents. I also think in our culture, we tend to really deny or judge grief, right? We applaud the person who's resilient, who's made it through. She's doing great. Because we're uncomfortable with the hard. We praise a grieving person who's so strong and so resilient, because sometimes that's actually easier for us. Oftentimes we think a new family, a new home, money, good schooling, permanence, all of those things outweigh every loss and every hard that a child has experienced, or in our minds could have, would have experienced. But in fact, adoption, foster care, in a wonderful home, it does not take away all of the pain. It does not fit perfectly. It's not a perfect one-for-one exchange of gains and losses. Sometimes we think, well, dwelling on the losses, that's not going to help anything. That's just actually going to make it worse, so let's get on with it, right? And then finally, I think the language that we use to talk about kids who've been through hard things, the language that we use to talk about adoption, we often focus on the redemption, the miracle, the putting back together of this broken story. We often don't talk, therefore, about what precipitated the child needing to come into care. Sometimes we want to demonstrate how wonderful adoption actually is, so we only focus on the good. the Reverend Keith C. Griffith. He says, adoption loss is the only trauma in the world where the victims are expected by the whole of society to be grateful. So let's go ahead and name some of the losses that are inherent in adoption, in foster care, inherent in a child having to leave his or her first family. What are some of the losses for, let's say, the foster parent, the adoptive parents? Just name them. Being able to give birth to a child. Being there for all the firsts. Absolutely. Time together, months, years, not knowing medical history, social history, not having all the answers for this child that you greatly love. There's a lot of I don't knows involved. What other losses that some of you might be experiencing?
Maybe relationships with family members.
Relationships with family members. Are you saying extended family members?
Right, sometimes they don't understand the challenges.
Sometimes they don't understand the challenges. I think many of us could say yes to that. That our very best friends, church family, extended family, neighbors, they don't get it. And in fact, they sometimes try to dismiss or diminish what you're going through, sometimes in their efforts to make you feel better, right? And we know how that feels. That's not then the person we're going to run to when we're feeling hard times, right? How about the loss of privacy? How many of you had to go through a home study? How many of you go to the grocery store and you're not seen as that typical family for whatever reason? Possible infertility for some families. How about this? You are not the only parents to this child. You are raising a child, whether for a short amount of time or a lengthier amount of time, a child that has another set of parents. Guys, that's not typical, right? Most of your friends are not doing that.
And the other parent was always better than them.
The other parent is always better than you. Anything else?
The loss of control about in our case, when our child was in utero, the things that mom was doing
There's a lot of loss of control. None of us were there to carry our children in the womb. We might have done things differently. And still loss of control yet today, right? Sometimes the control is in the hands of the courts. Loss of control. All right, what about the loss for the original parents? The first parents, the birth parents, the biological parents, so many different names that we use. What about the losses for them? I'm sorry? Their dreams for their child. You know, I think that most people, as little kids, they don't dream someday of giving birth to a child that they cannot parent. Okay? Tell me more about what you mean there. The unknown. Where is my child? Who is taking care of my child? Is someone taking care of my child? Is someone meeting their needs? The loss of significant moments, different milestones in their child's life for which they won't be present. Their loss of privacy, shame, perhaps rejection from future partners, spouses. Do they tell someone that they relinquished a child? Do they tell someone that their parental rights were terminated with the previous child to whom they gave birth? Rejection then, possibly, from others who will never be able to overcome the knowledge of events in their past. Oftentimes, I think they're expected to move on right away, right? Well, that problem's taken care of. Now you're on your own. Someone's taking care of your child. You need to move forward. Anything else? All right, how about losses for the adopted person or for the foster youth?
They're the only identity they know.
The only identity that they know. Do you want to add anything to that, or what do you mean by the only identity they know?
We currently have teenagers, and they don't have any other way of defining themselves except by what their childhood was, and they can't figure out how to form a new identity without that. They can't move on because that's their only frame of reference for who they are.
So how to move on? The myriad of unknowns, such as, where are my parents? Do I have any siblings? Why in the world did this happen?
Why did they abandon me?
Why did they abandon me?
What are my genetics?
What are my genetics?
Family tree projects.
Family tree project, yes. Loss of culture, loss of language. Loss of privacy.
I'm sure that you're in a grocery store and your child doesn't look and people ask questions, they've got to be reminded.
Every year, I actually don't go to the doctor every year, I should, but I give a big ol' X on the family history page. I was adopted, right? And we know that not everyone in the general public understands adoption. And then he still asks about my medical history, and I said, I just, what's not clear about the X? I don't know, right? Questions from friends. Questions from friends. Why don't you look like mom? Oh, she's not your real mom? Well, where's your real dad? That's weird. Loss of what they thought is normal. They're going to experience something different, right, than their non-adopted peers. They're experiencing something different than their own parents, perhaps, if their parents didn't experience time in foster care, or if their parents were not adopted.
Loss of the future they had with their parents.
Loss of the future, right, that they might have expected with their first parents. Just realizing I couldn't stay with the very people that brought me into the world. What in the world is wrong with me? What is wrong with them? Why? When most people get to stay with their parents. I remember the first time one of my children said to me, so we have 2 Korean kids, I'm Korean, we were all born in Korea, adopted. My husband's white, Dutch, non-adopted, right? And so one of my kids just saying, well, why didn't Daddy have to be adopted, right? Because he's kind of the odd man out here. He's the only one that's not Korean, which they feel kind of sad for him sometimes, and the only one who was not adopted, right? So, hey, why didn't Daddy have to be adopted? And for me to be able to say, take any of my emotions out of it, right, and say, oh, you know what? When Grandpa and Grandma, when they were married for a while, they really wanted to be parents, and they were really ready to be parents. And so they were able to take care of Daddy, and that's why Daddy didn't need to be adopted. That's the truth, right? And you know what, guys? For whatever reason, and wow, I wish we knew more, but your parents, my parents, they weren't ready to be a mom and a dad. Fill in the blanks with whatever information you might know pertinent to your child. Any other losses for the adoptee? Extended family, school friends, culture, the community. Sometimes we're raising these children in communities and neighborhoods that are very different than the one that they would have experienced had they been able to stay with their first family.
I was going along with that, but also what seems like a loss to
Yes.
It's very difficult to
Yes.
kind of curb that from
Yes.
well-intentioned.
Yes. So, the loss of people understanding what it's like to be adopted, right? She was sharing people that would want to say to her kids, well, kind of like it could have been worse, right? Look what you have now. Look what you have now. How about the loss of a really good understanding of what relationships are and what parenting is, right? To know that the very people who created you brought you into this world, that you are unable to be with them. Is this going to happen again? Who do I trust if this very first relationship in my life was not successful? Some kids wonder quite a bit.
Loss of their familial role, whatever it was.
Yes.
It often wasn't as a child, it was a parent or a survivalist or...
Huge shift in identity, perhaps when they come into your home from where they were and perhaps the responsibilities and the roles that they took on within that family, and now coming to a new family where the lifestyle, where the people in the home might be vastly different. How do I do that? How do I negotiate that? When I was kind of a caregiver over here, I was taking care of some people and I was fiercely independent, and now I'm here and this lady wants to take care of me. No, I don't want that. That's really hard. I can do this on my own. I used to have that privilege over here, and now I don't. Give it back.
Along the same lines as everything they knew was wrong. They're getting always projected on them that everything the way it was is all wrong.
So the notion that their before life was bad, wrong, no good, and now they've come into this wonderful fairy tale, perhaps, right? It should be grateful, yes. Even if you are not saying that to your child, what is that common narrative that's out there? Adoption is a blessing is on the billboard or on your Christmas tree in an ornament form. Adoption rocks is the hashtag used. But is there more? Because yes, adoption does include those things, and I don't want to state that there is no good or wonder within adoption. But it is one of the losses of which we don't talk about the hard. All right, anything else? I feel pretty beat down. We've talked about all the losses, right? We all probably feel a little beat down. I want to introduce to you the concept of adoption loss being ambiguous. So Dr. Pauline Boss, she's a psychotherapist. She's studied family stress. And wouldn't you think that, adoptive families have perhaps experienced a little family stress? She defines ambiguous loss as a loss with no end. Loss with no end. No closure. There was no formal goodbye. No ritual that marked the end of this relationship. No memorial. Perhaps no funeral. No death certificate. No answers for this end in relationship. No finality. No resolution. Perhaps a frozen grief, a frozen loss. She defines it and gives that way and says it comes in two forms. One is when someone is physically present with you and psychologically absent. So perhaps that's someone who's physically present with you and that person has dementia. How many of us have cared for someone with dementia? Physically they are with us, psychologically they are not with us. Was there ever a moment in time that you really formally got to say goodbye? You don't know how long this is going to go on, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You don't know what it's going to look like in the future. Physically, they hang on with you, but they are nothing like they were. Psychologically, they are absent. She also talks about the people who are psychologically on your mind, with you, and physically not present. She worked with families after 9/11 when they couldn't find the remains of a missing person. Might those people be holding on hope that their loved one is still around, because there was no finality. Nothing has been found to prove that this person is not here. She worked with families of that missing Malaysian flight when the plane went down, or so they suspect. If remains were not found, might those loved ones just wonder in the back of their mind, could my child still be alive? No finality. Thus, with our children, their first parents might still be on their minds. Physically not present, perhaps they're across an ocean, across a state, but might they still wonder? There are no answers to why they are now in a new place, a new home. So Dr. Boss says that this complicates the grief process, right? Because sometimes we don't even know exactly what we're grieving. Am I grieving because my first parents in Korea didn't have enough money to take care of a child? Am I grieving because maybe there was domestic violence involved? Am I grieving because perhaps they already had 3 children and couldn't afford one more? Why am I grieving? And then with this ambiguous loss, for our children to think, well, will I be in relationship someday with this person again? Should I look for that person? Do I owe it to this person? They brought me into the world, I better get looking. Or should I not look, because that would actually disrupt their life now? Do I have time? I'm getting older. They're getting older. Sometimes it puts the person in a state of limbo. What am I expected to do? What am I expected to think? I don't even know what happened.
My daughter said to me one day, and she doesn't talk a lot, said, but what if it's different?
But what if it's different?
Mm-hmm. What if it's different? And in your head, you're like, well, obviously it's going to be different. You know, I mean, how do you even...
The what ifs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would say, tell me more. I wonder what could be different. See what she's thinking. Any questions about ambiguous loss? Dr. Boss says, because of the ambiguity, loved ones can't make sense out of their situation. Emotionally, they're pulled in opposing directions. Love and hate for the same person. Affirmation and denial, right? Both of those things, affirmation and denial of their loss. And then oftentimes people feel they must withhold their emotions because social norms dictate that becoming upset is inappropriate and will bring only further harm. And then anticipating a loss, we both cling to our loved ones and push them away. Ambiguous loss. Our role as caregivers, professionals, parents, is to help our children learn to live with this ambiguity and the full range of emotions and feelings that accompany it. Any questions? So how then do we move forward with our children? So those of us in this room, we need to do some self-reflection ourselves first. What do we truly think about our children's first parents? What do we truly think about ourselves and our roles as foster parents or adoptive parents? Why, in fact, did we do this? Choose to adopt or choose to open up our home? How do we expect a foster child? How do we expect an adopted child to experience their adoption? Or, how do we experience grief? How do we expect others to interact with us when we are grieving? Perhaps does adoption remind us that we were unable to give birth? Does adoption remind us of dreams that have been unfulfilled? What losses have we experienced that haven't been well grieved? What shame might I carry as a foster or adoptive parent? And can I accept that my parenting journey is going to be different? Can I truly accept it, or am I still trying to prove myself that it's exactly like giving birth to a child? How do we look at our own families? So to the extent in which we can get comfortable with all of what adoption, all of what foster care entails, to the extent in which we can be comfortable with that, not scared of it, to that extent, can our children ever form an understanding and comfort level with who they are, their pasts, and their place in your family? This matters a lot, because as we think about talking about grief and loss, sometimes our kids can actually do it. We're the ones that can't do it, because it's hard. But we have to be those safe people to whom they can chat and discuss and wonder and be curious and share the extreme range of emotions, because if we are unable to be that person, to whom will they go? Or for how long will they choose not to share anything and to internalize? So next, we need to be conversationalists with our children about all things related to past, present, and future, as it relates to their first families, as it relates to adoption, as it relates to the circumstances that brought them into our homes. We know why a child might not come to us to talk with us about how they're feeling. Why? They don't have the words, right? We as 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, we don't have the words, let alone a 6-year-old, a 16-year-old. How do they even have the words, especially if that language has not been modeled for them? Why else might they not come to us? Fear. What are they afraid of? They're going to be mad that I'm asking about my biological parents. Fear of being rejected again.
Fear of hurting adoptive parents' feelings if they...
Fear of hurting their adopted parents' feelings. You know, somewhere in the community of adoption, they've kind of defined that as adoptee loyalty, right? That they have such fierce loyalty to the adoptive parents that they are afraid of rocking the boat. I'll hear adoptees say, well, I'm going to search for my birth parents, but not until my adoptive parents have passed away. Or I can't ask them that. That might make them feel like I'm sad, mad, or I don't love them. Sometimes it's not us directly putting that on them, but it's that common narrative of adoption that's told them that they must be grateful. Life is so much better. So then how dare I ask about my past? When in fact, isn't it a natural curiosity that one might have to wonder about from where they came? I said last night, so many of us are doing Ancestry.com, 23andMe, and these are non-adopted people that walk into their family reunions knowing all 170 of them, and they still have curiosity. And we're like, woohoo, that's so cool that you learned who your great-great-grandmother was. But then the adopted person says, hey, I'm thinking about searching for my birth parents. And we say, whoa, what's going on? Oh, she must feel upset. Oh, things in her adoption, she must not have really been able to deal with that very well. Come on, that makes no sense. Natural curiosity, right? It is not a direct attack on how you might be parenting your child. It is not a direct attack on how you are providing care to a child. Natural, typical, and okay, right? Okay. Perhaps the adopted parents don't want them to know. That's often the case. And why don't the parents want their kids to know? Try to protect them. That's right. So it's very well intended, right? The best intentions. However, what happens when we don't share what we know? Absolutely, mistrust. And, as I mentioned last night, is something so wrong with me or something so wrong with my birth parents, something so wrong with my circumstances that they can't even utter those words to me? Well, then what's wrong with me? If they can't even handle it, can they handle me? Do they only want the good and shiny about me? Or can they fully recognize all of who I am and from where I've come? So we know that we must be the initiators. Honey, it's sad when families can't stay together. Oh, honey, I bet you do wonder exactly where you were born. Especially when most of your friends, they have those baby pictures at the hospital. It's opening up a conversation about adoption, about the realities of adoption. It's not sitting down and saying, how are you feeling? Are you feeling really sad about your adoption right now? Or you must feel really angry. It's wondering. It's often a playful curiosity that we can have with our children about who they are. Like I said last night, it's not this big come to the dining room table because we must discuss adoption for 30 minutes. It's the in-between times that you might be throwing something out in the car, on a walk, after you watch a TV show. Teachable moments of throwing something out there. Holly Van Gulden, in her book, Real Children, Real Families, talks about tossing pebbles. And that's an indirect one-liner about adoption, or that touches on some part of your child's history, right? That does not necessitate a response. But your child might just toss a pebble back at you. And if he or she doesn't, it's okay. What have you demonstrated? That you know that adoption is part of your family's story and that you are not afraid to talk about it. That you understand that adoption encompasses more than celebrating once a year the day you became a family. That you recognize the complexities for a child who's in foster care and has experienced many transitions and losses in their short amount of life. In the article, Ambiguous Loss, Haunts Foster and Adopted Children, it's written by Dr. Jae-Ron Kim. She's a Korean adoptee, and she studied the work of Dr. Boss. She said children whose adoptive parents rarely discuss the absent birth parents or birth siblings feel the loss more keenly. In a study of young adult adoptees, researchers, they correlated heightened ambiguous loss symptoms with children and youth who lack information about their birth parents and have lived with a family who failed to honor the adoptee's connection with their family or culture of origin. So we know that the entire story must be shared with our children as we know it to be. I mentioned last night that by the ages of 10 to 12 developmentally, our children must know the facts, as you know them, of their story. For these children who were adopted, and for the files that you have, and as they've lived with you, you are building upon the story. Please know I'm not suggesting that if a child just came into your care at the age of 11, and they fit the 10 to 12, that you go home tonight and that you share everything that you know about their pasts when in fact you haven't even established trust and connection with them. I am not suggesting that. But oftentimes our kids are more ready to hear about who they are than we believe they are ready, because we are the parents who are trying to shield and protect, because that's what parents do. We put on the Band-Aid. Doesn't it feel good when our kids come to us and we can apply something? But yet this is a loss that we sometimes cannot apply anything to, right? It's about accepting and acknowledging with them. Questions? So we can specifically introduce words and language that give our children the full story, the truths of who they are and from where they came. Honey, it's tough, isn't it, that we don't know everything about the first years of your life as your friends do. Oh, it's not bad to have a lot of questions about adoption. I've met other kids who ask some of the same questions. You know what, honey? Sometimes you actually might change your mind a lot about how you feel about your first parents. Yeah, you might feel this way today. You might feel differently next month. It's okay to feel all those things all at once. No one has to make any decisions exactly about how you feel. Oh, honey, it is tough some days when we can't even make sense of what's happened to you in the first 3 years of your life. Oh, honey, isn't it hard when even the people closest to you don't seem to get it and keep asking you those same questions about what it's like being adopted? When your very best friends keep asking you the same questions? And in fact, you're right. Some days you might wish that you were never adopted. I can see how you'd feel that way. Are these statements that we can make to our kids? Oh, honey, all babies started in wombs. You know, people differ on what language you use: belly, tummy, womb, stomach. I tend to go with womb because it makes, it's the womb, right? And really, it's biblical. How many of our kids don't hear that they were knit together in their mother's wombs? They were fearfully and wonderfully made. All of us. So when I pray with my daughter sometimes, I'll say that. God, it's amazing that we were knit together in our mother's womb. And God, we don't even know who these ladies were. They're 6,500 miles around the globe. And God, we might not ever know who they are, but thank you so much for knitting us together in our mother's wombs and for creating us wonderfully, fearfully. It's a way that you're bringing up birth parents that doesn't necessitate some sit-down talk about it. But I need to hear those words, right? When you make these statements, you're giving them permission to come to you again. Even if they're not saying anything back to you in the moment, you are demonstrating that you have an acute awareness of the complexities of adoption. Oh, Dad's got my back. He mentioned this before. Silence communicates that we can't talk about something. That's why we must be the initiators. I encourage you, when your kids are in the midst of great grief, and expressing it perhaps through tears, through anger, through blaming, right? That we resist the urge to fix. It is really hard. But how many of us, when we're having a bad day, we just want someone to do what? Listen! You call your friend and say, ugh, it's been quite a day. The kids, this is really, really hard. And your friend says, well, at least you have kids. Does that feel good? No, you're not going to call that friend again. Or perhaps you're having a rough day and you say, yeah, we got in a big fight. Husband and I got in an argument. And your friend says again, at least you got a husband. At least someone picked you and you're loved. No, you just want someone to say, I've been there before too, I'm sorry, today was so rough, right? Because then often we can move through that, and then often we can start looking at the situation at large. And we do know, and we do see that there's life beyond this rough day, this argument with our spouse. But when someone right away dismisses it or tries to put on that Band-Aid, sometimes it feels worse, and we feel that grief even harder because someone wasn't willing to sit with you in it. In the bottom of page 3, there's different tenets of companioning. I'm not going to go through each of those. He's a grief counselor, Dr. Wellfelt, a grief counselor, an educator, and an author. And he came up with this philosophy of companioning, about bearing witness to the struggles of others, not about directing the struggles. So as we consider being present with kids who've experienced hard things, let's keep in mind that grief is natural. Grief is necessary. Think about in the Bible people who grieved. I think of Jesus and Mary and Martha and Lazarus. What happened? What short little verse of the Bible is in there? Jesus wept. Might he have known what was going to happen next? He still wept with his friends. He was deeply moved in spirit and troubled for and with his friends. So during these times, we're in physical proximity to our child, if they will let us. We're not going to take it personally. It's not a direct attack. We should not expect our child to explain every single detail of how they're feeling, but just be with them in their big feelings. I'll say that to my kids some days. Oh, looks like you got a lot of big feelings going on. And it's up to them if they want to say something, right? It's not asking for a yes or a no, or the specifics of how they feel. But it says, I see you. I recognize that something might be going on. Our kids are going to know how we're feeling about this based on our body language, that look on our face. So we've got to get comfortable with the hard. What questions do you have? I'd like to show this short video. It's about accepting one's grief and how to do it. And I think this can apply when we are working with children. Yes, I'm not getting out of the way here. It's up here. Working with children and parenting children as they express grief related to adoption.
So what do we do about all the pain we see in the world? All the pain we feel in our own lives? And why does it seem like our best efforts to help somebody feel better always backfire? I've been studying intense grief and loss, baby death, violent crimes, accidents, suicides, and natural disasters. And I've learned something really interesting. Cheering people up, telling them to be strong and persevere, helping them move on, it doesn't actually work. It's kind of a puzzle. It seems counterintuitive, but the way to help someone feel better is to let them be in pain. This is true for those giant losses and the ordinary, everyday ones. Educator Parker Palmer writes, "The human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed exactly as it is." He's talking about acknowledgement here. Acknowledgement is this really amazing multi-tool. It makes things better even when they can't be made right. For example, somebody's struggling. Their baby died, or there's been a bad accident, or their mom got sick, and they're just sad. It's way more helpful to join them in their pain than it is to cheer them up. But here's what we tend to do instead. "You have 2 other children, you need to find joy in them." Or, "You know what you need? You just need to go out dancing and shake it off." Or, "I felt really sad once. Did you try acupuncture?" We're not really sure what to do with someone's pain, so we do what we've been taught. We look on the bright side. We try to make people feel better. We give them advice. It's not like this is nefarious. I mean, we try to cheer people up because we think that's our job. We're not supposed to let people stay sad. The problem is, you can't heal somebody's pain by trying to take it away from them. Now, acknowledgement does something different. When a giant hole opens up in someone's life, it's actually much more supportive to acknowledge that hole and let pain exist. It's actually a radical act to let things hurt. It goes against what we've been taught. In order to really support you, I have to acknowledge that things really are as bad as they feel to you. If I try to cheer you up, you end up defending yourself and your feelings. If I give you advice, you feel misunderstood instead of supported. And I don't get what I want either, because I wanted you to feel better. It's pretty rare that you could actually talk somebody out of their pain. Rarely does the admonishment to look on the bright side actually heal things for someone. It just makes them stop telling you about their pain. It's so tempting to try to make things better. When somebody shares something painful, it's much more helpful to say, "I'm sorry that's happening. Do you want to tell me about it?" To be able to say, "This hurts," without being talked out of it, that's what helps. Being heard helps. It seems too simple to be of use, but acknowledgement can be the best medicine we have. It makes things better, even when they can't be made right.
Any thoughts or reflections on the video? Difference between empathy and sympathy. I like how she hands out the rainbows, right? She's just passing them out, hoping it's going to help. We need to be able to say and to think to ourselves, yes, this is how you feel, even if I don't see it the same way because I haven't experienced it, and your feelings are okay. We cannot get through grief by trying to take away the pain. It just doesn't work that way. And when we sit with someone else, when we provide that empathy, that's often when we can move forward, right? Because we have someone who gets it, who's willing to get it, to discuss it. And I have had those moments as I've shared something perhaps related to my own journey, of someone trying to cheer me up and say, well, at least you were adopted. Or can you imagine how long you could have been in that orphanage? I mean, what am I to say to that, right? It just shuts you right down. As opposed to someone who said, oh, wow, I've never thought about it that way. Or you're right. does make no sense. So let's think about the different experiences, events, days that might trigger feelings of grief and loss. I'm pretty confident that you all know some of those experiences, days, events, milestones. But what might cause kids to think more about their separation from their first family or about what they have lost? Holidays! We're getting close to them, right? Milestones, such as weddings, graduations, family reunions, first days of school, last days of school, Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthdays, basically every day, I guess, right? It could be a smell. It could be a visual. So, my dad, my adoptive father, died last November. So it's almost been a year. Next week will be a year. And as the seasons change in Indiana, which I know you guys have no concept for, but the seasons were changing, and I was getting out this pair of pants that I wore when I was with him in his hospital bed. And I had not worn them since last winter. And even as I pulled this pair of leggings, it's so ridiculous, it's like activewear that I'm pulling out of my closet to wear with a sweatshirt at home, I felt something. Leaves on the ground, the changing of seasons, they're going to remind me of something that I've lost. Other events or triggers that our kids might experience. A place that they've been to, same. As you probably have been to a place that you visited that reminds you. Great-grandma's cooking, an experience you had. Adoptees as they get married, as they become parents. Dating often causes adoptees to self-reflect a bit, to look at what they have, to look at what they have lost. Birth of a child. Transitions such as moving homes, even if they're moving with their new family. The death of a pet. The first day of school and the last day of school, because now I've lost a caregiver that I've had for 9 months and I've come to love, and now, man, I got to move up to the next grade and get to know someone else. The divorce of adoptive parents. Seeing something violent, if that's something they've experienced before. How about movies? The media. Disney movies. I took my son a few years ago to go see, with his friend, the Lego Batman movie. Does anyone remember the Lego Batman movie? There's a couple adoption, orphanage references in that movie, right? And you all know of that blog called Adoption in the Movies. It's a blog, you Google it, I think it's adoptioninthemovies.com.org, and it actually gives you a little synopsis of movies and any adoption triggers, which is super helpful. So I knew walking into it that there was going to be something. And I just kind of briefly mentioned, very neutrally to my son, like, hey, I heard there's something about adoption in this movie. We'll have to see if they really get it. And it wasn't this big intense, oh, we got to talk about it, break it down. It was just kind of a nonchalant mention, right? Because we are so comfortable mentioning adoption in our family, because it's kind of, part of what made us who we are in our home as a family. Anything else that you can think of that might cause? I'm sorry? Moving, absolutely. Another change. What do they take with them on this move? What is actually theirs? What do they deserve and not deserve? Anything else? You guys said that at the same time. So you were both saying the same thing. When we celebrate the anniversary, perhaps, of becoming a family, and so I know that families do it differently. And if you're part of, the adoption community, whether online or, groups that get together like this, there may have been discussion about that anniversary. And do we celebrate it? How do we celebrate it? What do we call it? Who do we let take the lead? So we know in my generation it was often called Gotcha Day. And then we have also learned now from adult adoptees that term actually isn't their favorite. And so I just saw on Facebook, of which I'm sometimes on, and I forget what it is. I think it's the I Am Adopted page on Facebook. They did a survey. They put a question out to adult adoptees. Several hundred, maybe 500 responded. Do you like the term Gotcha Day? I did not participate in this research. And 95% of them said they do not like the term gotcha. Interesting. I thought that was interesting. So my family, we celebrated it for a bit, and then it kind of faded out. My suggestions are, you put the child first, and you think about how the child might perceive this. Do you have to celebrate Gotcha Day in big ways in order to demonstrate your love for your child? I think that's a consideration. Might your child want 70 people to be at a Gotcha Day party when he or she is 12, 13, 18? Might they want you to be posting publicly on Facebook about it all the time? Questions to ask yourselves. Yes, there are some kids who love Gotcha Day, right? At the same time, these kids are going to continue to process their stories and continue to understand who they were, who they are, and might they not like it in the future? Perhaps. Is there a way that you can still convey your love, commitment, and delight in your child without Gotcha Day? I actually think it's possible. I feel guilty in adoptive parent situations because we do not celebrate Gotcha Day. Sometimes I don't even mention the day to my kid. In fact, I'm thinking now Halloween was one of the days that we came home on an airplane with our child, and I didn't do a thing, didn't even say a thing. There are some years that I'll just say, oh yeah, October's rolling around, so many years ago. We were in Korea, we were hanging out. Mommy lost her passport, which is true, and we had to stay in Korea longer. And I'll kind of reflect with my kid on that, but it is not a public declaration. Because I know that other people reading about this public declaration may not understand adoption. And I do not think that my kids need to be the recipients of all of those comments. Happy Gotcha Day! How might a child respond to that if it's a stranger? So just things to think about. If you're celebrating it now, even just reflecting with your child on it. If you choose to continue celebrating it, I'm not saying it's inherently wrong, but I'm suggesting that we be mindful in the language that we use. And that if we are giving so much attention to Gotcha Day, are we also willing to give attention to the hard? Or is Gotcha Day, does that encompass most of how we talk about adoption? And if so, are we then giving our kids only one perspective on adoption, leaving them to feel the loss all by themselves because you haven't expressed that it's there? So my goal in parenting my children when it comes to adoption is to have never built up some kind of fairy tale, a romanticized story of what adoption is that I will later have to deconstruct because they've deconstructed it already in their mind. But that we are talking about everything related to who they are and to how they came into our family and for what's ahead for them, right? For my kids, we've been on and off with learning the language, and they're back in again right now. And it's hard. And they've spent 3 weeks in Korea these last couple of years. But for me even to toss out there, guys, if you guys choose to study here someday, or if someday you get to meet your first family, to have some of the language, it's really going to be helpful. because they know what it's like to sit in a room and there's translators. You miss a lot of the intent, a lot of the communication. What questions do you all have? Some of our kids are going to like different activities, right? I don't know who your kids are, but sometimes creating some kind of timeline with them and showing them perhaps in their mother's womb, and you're making a stick person with a little bulge, and you're saying, oh, that might be what your first mom looked like. You are probably kicking in there. You are still getting strong. We know that babies have to stay in there for about 9 months. That's where you started. Oh, I wonder how your mom was feeling then. You're right. She might have felt a little unsure because she didn't know what was going to happen next. And then maybe you're drawing a building to symbolize where your child was born. And you're telling her that babies cry a lot, and that babies need diapers, and that babies need big people to take care of them. And that the big people in your child's life weren't quite ready to take care of a baby because, man, they still had to take care of themselves. Oh, and this is the day that we met you. And then chronicling on, this was your 6th birthday. Oh, do you remember that bike you got for your birthday? It was pink and purple. Oh, yes, this was the day that you got to spend time with your first family again. Do you remember we went to the park? I wonder how you felt then. You were so excited to go down that slide. And it was a little interesting when those people wanted to hug you and you didn't know who they were. So giving them some everyday things in that timeline, giving them some of the more pivotal moments as it relates to their identity, talking through it. It's light, it's playful, it's curious. I wonder if you felt this way. Or I wonder what's yet to come. I wonder what it's going to look like someday when you live somewhere else. When maybe you go to college, which scares some kids a lot, right? Like to leave their adoptive parents or to leave their foster parents, that's really scary. Some kids love to journal. I spent time with a little Korean boy who was probably only 8 at the time, and his mom searched high and low for a journal that was not pink or purple, and he really wanted a journal. And so he invited me over for dinner one day, which was very sweet, right? A little 8-year-old having you over for dinner, and his parents left so we could have dinner together. They just went downstairs. And so he and I are just chatting, and he says, I have this journal. I said, oh, that's cool. What do you write about in your journal? And he says, well, I write in it when I feel something about adoption. I said, okay. And so then he said, and I have this one page called the scribble page. And I'm like, tell me about the scribble page. And that's when he just scribbles really, really hard with an ink pen because he feels mad. I'm like, oh, wow, scribble page. What a great idea. And then he says, and there's one other thing that I've written in here that I can't show my mom and dad. I said, oh, I wonder why you can't show them. And he said, but I'll show you. And I said, all right. I said, but before I look, I would really like to tell you, I think your mom and dad can handle whatever it says on that page, right? Because I never want to come between kids and their parents. I want to bring them together on this. And so he showed me, and it said, some days I don't want to be adopted. There's no shame in that. Of course some days you don't feel like you want to be adopted, because man, this is hard than Billy across the street who gets to never think about these things because he got to stay with his parents and he does not have any voids in his life. No shame in that, right? Oh, I can see how you would feel that way sometimes. I wonder when those times are, and it's light, right? It's not this deep depth of despair. Sometimes our kids will bring us there, but we don't have to bring our kids there if that's not where they're at, right? It's just an open dialogue about it. And then his parents came upstairs and he showed them the page, and that makes me very happy, right? Because I like it when kids and parents can connect. And they were so cool about it, right? Like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Not a direct attack on who they are. They get that there are some complexities with being someone who was adopted. Sometimes role-playing with our kids can be helpful. Oh, I wonder what you would say if you could meet your birth dad again. What do you think he would be like? You're not saying this is absolutely what it's going to be like, but you're allowing your child to be curious with you together. And you can see what's going on in their minds. If there's some deep, crazy assumption that they have, that they've been operating under, that is probably not true, you can say, ooh, I can see how you would have thought that. Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know. There aren't too many crayon princesses over there anymore, so your mom might not have been one, right? But our kids fantasize, and so how can we curiously and together talk about these things? Sometimes parents will have an annual tradition with their child on their child's birthday, that together they plant a flower, they light a candle. Different families do different things. Some adoptees or kids who are in care will have a box that they keep special things in as it relates to their first family or to their adoption. Of course, healthy distractions, right, that we would provide for any child, sports, activities, hobbies. This fall, I did an adoptee group for 5th, 6th, and 7th graders, and it was a social group. We got together for 90 minutes. I'd bring food, order pizza, we talk about our highs and lows, not as it relates to adoption, but just as it relates to being a 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th grader, right? And then we would talk a little bit about adoption here and there, because they were with other kids who were adopted. It's such a powerful experience not to be the only. Where they didn't have to explain to someone else, yes, I was born to one family, couldn't stay with them, I'm in a new, yes, I look nothing like my dad, but yes, he's my real dad. But they all kind of got each other, even though some of their scenarios were very different from one to another. They had a common thread. So I don't know what's available in your area, but I encourage you to start one up. Find someone, right? Get your kids with other kids who are like them. You know, I'm always interested because, you know, there's these groups all across the nation for adoptive parents to get together. Do we provide this for kids who are adopted? Are there 2-day conferences for kids to come together and talk about how hard it is to be an adopted kid? We get to talk about how hard it is to be adoptive parents and to get strategies. I know it's not just talking about the hard, but then we assume when a kid expresses something difficult that something's wrong. When I don't assume that something's wrong with all of you guys. I recognize the complexities of parenting a kid who has another set of parents, right? And so can we offer the same grace to our children as they try to sort out who they are? All right, it's 10:30 on the dot. I know I have to wrap up. Thank you so much for coming. I think there's some resources cited at the bottom of the page, right, of which we talked about. At the top of the first page is my email address. If you want to email me and have a question, I'll try to point you to a resource. Sometimes it takes a bit for me to email you back, but I will try. My website's on there. I very rarely post anything, so there's old stuff. There is something that some people have found helpful as a sample letter to a teacher, how to go about communicating with a teacher before the beginning of the year about your child's situation, how to do it in a proactive way. And then on Facebook, I try to post about race, adoption, identity, how they all intersect. So I think that's on the top of your page too. But thank you guys for coming out this morning and for having me.